today we're discussing, should schools teach British values? And I feel that many discussions during this weekend have in the end said, it is a contestation of values. There does seem to be an issue with young people being disaffected, some showing that by going to a different country and fighting what for us would seem a relatively barbarous war. And it is a debate about values and a fight for values. But I think what values we should be fighting for or defending, and whether schools are the place to initiate that fight, is something we want to explore. So I will introduce the speakers in the order in which they're speaking. So the first person who's on my left down there is Rania Hafez. And Rania is a senior lecturer in education and community studies at the University of Greenwich. The next person is John Blake here. And John is a leading history practitioner at the Harris Federation, which is apparently he's the history consultant. So if you have a question about history, you ring John up, which seems quite cool. We have Abdul Rehman-Malik, and Abdul is an award-winning London-based journalist, educator, and organiser. And then on my right at the end, is Toby Marshall. Toby is currently undertaking a PhD with Professor Michael Young, looking at the knowledge structure of the new national curriculum for England. And so we have a panel of great educationalists who are engaged with this question. So I hope this will be a very fruitful discussion. So, Rania.
Okay, thank you, Jane. One of my concerns, speaking both in the morning about extremism and ISIS and this evening, was that all I'm going to be repeating is glimpses of the blindingly obvious. And so I'm going to try very hard, maybe to come with something original. I'm not sure. I think most of the things I'm going to say are probably ideas or questions that have occurred to most people. The one question that when we talk about British values, people always say, well, what makes them British? I'm not going to talk about that, because that's a different discussion, and I think it's too superficial a discussion. I think there's some more important issues underneath. And it's not a new question. Should schools be teaching values? Put the British bit aside for a minute there. I have a quote here from Aristotle, and he talks about education being regulated by law and should be an affair of state, is not to be denied. And then he goes on to saying, as things are, there is disagreement about the subjects, for men are by no means agreed about the things to be taught, whether we look for excellence or the best life. Neither is it clear whether education is more concerned with intellectual or with moral excellence. The existing practice is perplexing. No one knows on what principle we should proceed. It is salutary to realize that Aristotle went on to actually say exactly what should be in the curriculum and exactly what character education should be. But it's very interesting that he did pose this question, that it's a debate, it's a discussion, but he wasn't too scared to actually then put his own ideas on the line and saying that's what education should be. And in a way, this is where I want to come from. Two terms that really trouble me here. And I speak as somebody who teaches teachers. And a lot of them come and do their masters with me, their MA in education. And the two questions are the teaching and the values. So let's take the word values first. My concern with that, and we're talking here not about a kind of esoteric idea of what these values are, it's a very clear government directive specifying actually 4 values that are to be taught. And they are democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance. And on the face of it, you'd think, brilliant, there's nothing wrong with those. Except then you come to the idea of actually teaching these values. First of all, it's not an exhaustive list. I'm sure if we put our minds together, we could come up with extra, additional values to these that we think are very important to be imparted to young people. But they in themselves, actually, and I'm not saying they're contested, but the approach to them might be problematic. For instance, I know that when it comes to the rule of law, the way some teachers are interpreting it is by telling their students, the kids, that everyone has to obey the law. But that is contested because sometimes actually you want to challenge the law. And we know, we were talking just last week about looking at the anniversary of the suffragette movement, and these were radical women who challenged the law of the time, actually wanted to change it. So the meaning of the rule of law is that we are all equal before the law. That's another concept. So my worry is when you even look at democracy, Again, what do we mean by this? Is it just putting your cross on a ballot paper every 5 years and then completely abdicating your responsibility to engage politically? I would have rather seen democracy and political engagement, for instance. So I think the issues of, first of all, the values that we have from an edict from the government are contestable in terms of how we are to interpret them and how they are being interpreted. But also they're not exhausted. But also who actually came up with these values? To me, the ideas of a society deciding on its values is through discussion, through days like these, through something like the Battle of Ideas. I've been giving the yellow card. I didn't realize I was talking for that long so far. So the other issue then is the teaching bit. And someone said to me, I'm not going to claim credit for this, you can learn values, you can't teach them. And it's very interesting because I actually think that, and this relates to a debate earlier, that these values we learn from literature, from art, from the subject that we are taught, from the way we behave with each other, from the rules of a school. So they actually are permeating the school life. And my worry with this approach, because I see it with my MA students who are actually practicing teachers, if they are thinking they've got to jump through hoops, they're sitting there thinking, Ofsted's going to come in, how am I telling the children? And it's going to become indoctrination as opposed to really imparting and allowing the children to receive the universal values that I think I would like to see in our society.
I'm pleased you didn't talk about the British bit, because I'm not going to talk about that either. I worried that was going to be bad, but no, I'm not going to talk about it either. And I think I want to develop on that idea of what teaching those values might mean, and the way in which we conceptualise how the school actually teaches and what it means to pass on knowledge and understanding in that way. I mean, I think I'm not particularly hostile to the use of the term British values defined relatively broadly. I think it seems to me essential that in a liberal democratic society we share the values that allow a liberal democratic society to function, and that those values should be found within schools and shared within schools. But I think contestability, as has already been suggested, is of course at the heart of those liberal values. Liberal society is one that can tolerate, if not endorse, its own opposites and opposition. Indeed, I would argue that's why liberal society has endured, liberal democratic society has endured, when other more authoritarian societies have passed away. So the question then is, what role does school play in that? And I think there are two things required for the transmitting of those values, both of them in an indirect fashion. The first one is a properly grounded, liberal, academic education that provides students with powerful knowledge. That is not just information about the world, although of course that's essential, but knowledge about the status of that knowledge. So a way of understanding how that knowledge has been formed, what constitutes valid knowledge, what constitutes a legitimate way of challenging that knowledge. I'm an historian. There are huge numbers of interpretations offered across history, but for example, Holocaust denial is not a legitimate one. It fails the rules of historical thinking, and students should understand why, and understand why that is different from arguments about interpretations to do with the causes of the First World War, for example, and they should be able to navigate through that. And the only way to do that is to have a curriculum grounded in knowledge and grounded in the status of knowledge. But I also think that there is this idea of how we model and manifest for students the values we think are important. And as I thought about this, it dawned on me that for most students, the school is the aspect of the state that they interact with most frequently throughout their childhood. And that, I think, creates issues that need to be considered more deeply than they generally are in schools. School organisation needs to be centred around the integrationist liberal values that we want, but it also needs to model for students the ways in which we resolve rights clashes within them. So I think there is no point standing in the front of a class and just announcing to students, here are the rights, here are the values, you tick that box, that's done. They need to understand and be able to discuss them, but they also need to see them manifested in practice. So to take an example, clearly religious rights are an aspect of the Human Rights Act and of the rights we might want to talk about. The Begum case before the Supreme Court established quite clearly when and why a school might be able to interfere with the religious rights of its students. A young student at the school wanted to wear a particular form of religious dress. The school said that that form was too austere. They didn't want it to be part of the rules, and their argument for that was that other students, other female students in the school, would be forced to wear it and they wouldn't want to. So there we have a rights conflict that was resolved by the courts. But schools are doing that all the time, and they don't reach into the courts most of the time. And we need to think about how that's done and whether schools are well prepared for that rights resolution. But I think we also need to think about the performative aspect of that rights resolution. That the students concerned in seeing how rights are maintained, rewarded, and challenged, and those conflicts resolved, does not just apply to those students who are immediately experiencing that issue, but also to the other students in the school who are seeing how that's being resolved, how those discussions are being shaped, who is allowed to take part, on what basis they're allowed to take part. So I think for me, the answer to inculcating and embedding values in our schooling is, on the one hand, an academic curriculum which empowers students to address their own complex choices and to understand how they can challenge and change the world around them in accordance with the legitimate rules of knowledge, and with the school as a manifestation of the state in how it resolves those rights conflicts. Thank you.
I've been away for the last few weeks, and I arrived home just to drop my bags before I came here, and I found this great magazine waiting for me at my front door.
Which one is it?
Now, that's British Values for British People. It's a lovely little publication produced by a group of mostly South Asian, some Muslim, some not, activists in Bristol. But it seemed for me to writ the moment large, because the question that I have, and I don't disagree with my fellow panelists, in fact, they've raised some really important questions, is what's the big frickin' deal about values right now? Why are we getting so excited now? Weren't we teaching them for the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years? I was a high school teacher in Canada. Did we talk about values then? So we got to know the context. We all know the context. It's just stated. Since 9/11, there's a concern. Values is now linked to security. Security threat, a threat from the inside, a brown threat, a green threat, a Muslim threat, an ISIS threat, a terrorist threat, an extremist threat, a violent extremist threat. We are creating a discussion about values, something so essential, something so important, something so critical to our collective citizenship and our collective identity as British people. But we're creating it in the context of a security crisis. Well, ergo, the whole conversation about values is going to get really screwed up. And the way we're going to approach that conversation is also going to be really colored. And so I ask the fundamental question about values now, is that unless we tackle the context in which that conversation is taking place, we're not going to have a very good discussion about teaching those very values, which all of a sudden seem so very important. John said something really interesting, and I really agree with him, and I just want to, I want to take that one step further and sort of try to define it. When we talk about teaching values in school, and when we talk about giving students, and I think we have a lot of young people here, and I'd love to hear from you about this, is that when I was a teacher in Canada, and when I did some supply teaching here for my sins, any talk of teaching tools of learning was kind of poo-pooed, because the drift in current educational thinking about national curriculum is towards knowledge, facts, figures, understandings, rubrics, this kind of subjective evaluation of what we're actually learning. Whatever happened to historiography or epistemology or pedagogy? Teachers don't learn pedagogy, by the way. As a graduate of teachers' colleges around the world, I can tell you, teachers don't like to talk about pedagogy or the values that underline their teaching. The fact is that those very tool-giving disciplines that would allow us to question, engage, be a bulwark to our liberal or social democratic tradition is missing. The tools for thinking are missing. For me, those represent epistemology, historiography, understanding how we deal with knowledge, to me, are based on values themselves. Intrinsic in those disciplines are the values that we ought to be teaching. So, in fact, I think what we should be talking about is not just what kind of values are we teaching, but what are the tools that we have to challenge conventional wisdom. I remember when I used to teach American history, we had a really horrible and terrible American history textbook. It was written by like a friend of Ronald Reagan's. It was that bad. And so what I decided to do in the classroom was, I decided to take chapter by chapter the textbook that we were assigned by the school board and Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. For me, it was a profound experience to watch young people engage with history as historians, to see, well, why is Zinn saying this, and why is this guy saying this? What is the difference? Why? And I think encoded in that, of course, is a politics, my politics, Zinn's politics. I ascribe to that. No big surprise there. But at the same time, it was a way of forcing the conversation about what, in fact, we were learning. And I think that brings me to really my final point, is that when we talk about what we're learning, and I think Rania raised this quite clearly, and I'll just support her on this, is that who are the overlords of knowledge? And what kind of social engineering do they want? Let's just be honest. Why are we teaching values? We should be asking Theresa May and Cameron and all of their colleagues, why are you teaching the knowledge you're teaching? What's your outcome? What's the outcome of the values discussion? What's the outcome of the knowledge that we're teaching? What kind of social engineering do you have up your sleeve? Because everyone is trying to social engineer a certain type of society. I probably am too. So let's be honest about it. Let's place that honesty in the public square and allow us to have a genuine, authentic debate about the kind of knowledge and the kind of society that we actually want, and try to do so while recognizing the context and ultimately recognizing the problem of Britishness. Because the problem of Britishness isn't with people like me. I'm very happy to be British. The problem of Britishness is with those who felt they've been British all along, and their sense of their Britishness has now been dislodged. They feel uneasy. They feel diseased about what their identity actually is, because there's all these funny people around claiming Britishness around them. Our cities have changed. Our societies are changing. Our world is changing. Well, I like to think I belong to that generation, the generation that is in the midst of a changing world and a changing society. And if I am, and I consider myself to be, then our education should be up to snuff.
Without wishing to manufacture a discussion, I think I'll just say initially that I don't think a school is a democracy, and I'm very comfortable with these values. I was pleased when those values came out, but what I am uncomfortable with, and that's what I want to talk about in my introduction, is the prevent strategy. So for those of you who are not aware of it, I thought I'd just share some details about the prevent strategy, which is done in the name of British values and involves schools, and I teach in a college, an FE college, and it involves us intimately and suggests some criticisms of that. So for those of you not aware of it, Prevent is a multi-agency initiative involving schools, colleges, social services, welfare agencies that's being led by the British Security Services. And the aim of this is to counter extremism and terrorism. And as part of that, lecturers and teachers will be aware, but the others of you may not be, that we're all under something called a prevent duty, which means that we're required to, should we have any doubts about a student, inform the security services of that. Referrals take place without the knowledge of students or their parents, and the strategy itself defines extremism, I quote, a vocal or active opposition to, quote, fundamental British values, which are democracy, rule of law, personal liberty, tolerance, as well as, perhaps somewhat ironically, freedom of speech. On referral to Prevent, what's called the Prevent channel, they have a number of options available to them. Diversionary activities is one. Sort of de-radicalisation programs, which would be and you can be discharged from Prevent if you're judged not to be a risk, plus all of the normal battery of security measures, but including also, if they judge you not to be a risk, to be referred to social services. So the model here is fundamentally one of child protection, but applied to the realm of ideas and beliefs. And I think the central institutional image in this package is the student as the victim of radical manipulation. I've got some criticisms of this, and I think maybe these criticisms might bring out some of the differences between me and the rest of the panel. But I just want to state that I've been teaching for nearly 20 years in East London and Essex, and this image of the vulnerable young adult about to be radicalised is something that I profoundly disagree with. It's just not my experience. I'm not saying there's nobody in that category, but this is not my general experience of teaching political ideas and other ideas, film studies. I teach all kinds of subjects to students. So what are my objections to Prevent? First of all, I think it's going to chill free speech and the free speech of students, which is a profoundly important thing to be protected. In my view, students should have the right to hold and express non-liberal viewpoints. But critically, and this is why I don't believe it's democracy, within the contextual confines set by the teacher. But they should be able to do so without fear of state monitoring. And I think Prevent is a profoundly fearful, aggressive and authoritarian response, but to a real problem. There is a real problem, which I think we need to discuss. I think, this is my second criticism, securitizing pedagogy makes for bad pedagogic practice. And my experience of teaching young people is this: they need to vocalize ideas, they need to have the space to experiment with ideas. They need to own those ideas and not feel under threat through expressing those ideas, be they radical, mainstream, or otherwise. This is an important part of them maturing and deciding maybe that they don't want to be a radical. Finally, I'd argue that Prevent could be counterproductive because it provides the already alienated, perhaps, with a potent cultural script. And here my thinking is guided by the landmark studies of deviance within sociology in the 1950s in America, and also taken up by people like Stanley Cohen in this country subsequently. And it seems to me that the powerful insight within the sociology of deviance is this: we all deviate, we all differ from the norms at certain points in our life. But the question is how society reacts to the deviant, how they choose to isolate, contain and repel. And I think we need to think about the moral career of the deviant that might be initiated by Prevent as a strategy. Perhaps the treatment is the disease. That's something we need to consider. Some of you would have heard this week on Radio 4 a primary school head proudly declaring that a child that had come into her school who asked to pray and then asked the female students to cover up was being referred to Prevent. So I ask you, the audience, our panel, the chair, what moral career might this head have initiated there? Are we in danger of seeing Robert Merton's self-fulfilling prophecy?
Many years ago, I was lucky enough to do a politics A-level and to be taught about the justice system and the principles like trial by jury, right to silence, presumption of innocence before guilt. So, you know, why they were principles, what follows from them, how they came about, and what happens if you don't have them. All of those have been rolled back in recent years by people who I can only presume didn't learn about those principles or don't care about those principles. So Rania mentioned rule of law earlier. This is, you know, at one hand we're trying to get people to engender respect in the rule of law, but at the same time we're emptying it out of the things that make it worthwhile. So how is that going to pan out?
I think Abdul put his finger on it. It isn't that the government has become suddenly incredibly philosophical. It's entirely a response to security. I think it might be sort of interesting that John is a historian practitioner. I'm not quite sure what that is. He's an historian, I suppose. But looking at where we've come from, how did people acquire values in the past? What we have now is a sort of vague idea of what values might be, but they have no roots. Now, this was a Christian country, and I'm not an apologist for religion. I'm simply observing what actually happened. We had institutions called the Christian Church, the Catholic Church. And through those structures, week by week, people went and they were inculcated with certain values. And in the Christian faith, they came from 10 Commandments, for example. But what they actually produced was the idea of things like right and wrong, generosity, courtesy, honesty, do to others what you would like done to yourself. And this was something that happened week by week, and lots went to sleep. But essentially, this was a structure which gave the country values, and no doubt in Islam they do the same thing. In a secular society, this has actually disappeared to the point where no one actually knows what the values are. There is no sort of regular inculcation of, or teaching of these things. You do it in a sort of haphazard way in school, and in parents they say, oh, but Johnny, don't do that, when it happens to arise. And so the problem is, when you say British values, you don't know what they mean. For example, is the secularization of children, sexualization of children, music videos, fashion, body image, is that British values? Is pornography, which is ever present, is that a British value? We don't know. So we've lost an institution, and we're rather wondering what to replace it with.
My question was going to be, I agreed, sorry, I missed the guy on the end's name. He's looking at his paper right now. But, well, yeah, but what you were saying about the prevent strategy being a poor response to an actual problem, I think that reflects a lot of what I believe. I mean, there is a genuine problem there. The prevent strategy is a wrong approach for it. Do you have any idea what would be a better approach to deal with that problem?
And, yeah.
I'm a young Muslim, and when I heard about the British values planned by David Cameron, for me that was a direct attack on young Muslims, because for the first time, I was talking to my sister about this the other day as well, it was as if we knew that we were being directly, we were in the spotlight basically. Everything we did was in the media's spotlight. What we used to be really careful about is there's some young Muslims that are in mosques in these faith schools. On the one hand, they're being taught about Islamic values, what it is to be a Muslim, and then you're going to school, and then you're finding out what British values is. Now, this isolation of what it's an insult, because what you're trying to say basically is the teaching of British values, I would say, is something that parents have responsibility for too. What this can lead to is young people being even more radicalized, and then finding groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda as a safe haven where they feel more accepted, British compared to Britain.
So I'll come back to the panel, because it does perhaps to further develop the discussion of values, and there does seem to be this thing about, you said the values are there and you can't teach them, you learn them, but it comes back to that gentleman perhaps saying, but what are the roots of values? Does seem to be this whole British values, as if there's free-floating values that, as Abdul says, just seem to come and go and don't have any depth. So that doesn't seem to think of values. And the young man who said... sorry, but...
I want to... It's interesting, talking about the last speaker, and you connect to what Abdurrahman was saying, that it seems to be coming at a point where a specific response to seeing Muslims as a security problem. So basically, suddenly, all these funny Muslims have really strange ideas, and maybe schools should be, teaching these things because somehow they're missing them. I don't actually. I understand how I feel. I actually think that the problem is bigger than that, because I actually understand what the other gentleman said, which is about, when you had the churches, and I grew up in a Catholic convent, so Muslim Catholic convent, I had loads of very similar values, but I could tell the difference. But actually the fundamental values were very similar. And you had faith. So I'm not going to be saying, no, faith is not a place where you can discuss values. I'm a person of faith. I don't just dress like this for fashion reasons. So yes, I think faith is a place, but we are also living in a secular society, and I think that we miss out the public places where we could actually debate, contest, negotiate what might come to us as important values for us as a society. And I really don't think that can be done through an edict. And I know what Toby was saying, and I didn't realize he was going to talk about prevent. That's another discussion altogether. But I don't have a problem with, as I said, democracy, rule of law, individual liberty, that's fine. But putting them in an edict where teachers start responding, and there was the question about the rule of law, and I want to refer back to citizenship teaching, because that was a brilliant idea. Yeah, we all need to learn to be citizens, but actually, having taught a lot of students who've been through schooling and had citizenship lessons, they actually found them very boring, because the teachers were doing it mechanically. They didn't have an underlying value You know, that underlying ideology, believing in something, having faith, actually in values that we hold as society, it wasn't coming across. They just had to do it because it was on the curriculum. Ofsted would be telling them off. So I think there is a mechanicality of it, which is problematic. But there's also the fact that it seems to be coming at a point which is trying to solve a problem, and we're not talking about it. But to me, more than anything else, who actually comes up with these values? It's up to us to debate and discuss and actually define these values. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
There are lots of things students find boring in schools. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. Sometimes students need to learn that some things are boring, they just need to know them. I think the problem with lots of citizenship lessons is that actually they were entirely denuded of genuine knowledge, in the sense that they actually contained any information that you needed to acquire, take away, and later be tested on. And I think that sort of feeds into my wider point about knowledge. When I endorse powerful knowledge and people understanding the status of knowledge, that's not to undermine the idea that you need to know something. You need to know a lot about history in order to make judgments about the ways in which you can challenge particular interpretations. So I don't think the work over the past 5 years to place more knowledge into the English school curriculum is a problem. I think it needs to feed into that wider status of knowledge idea. And I think some of the problems we've had with things like British values or citizenship or personal learning, PLUTs or whatever, I can't even remember what it actually stood for, but various things that teachers will remember having handed down from slightly awkward-looking senior leaders in extremely boring inset days. They were sort of interventions designed to kind of solve the fact that we weren't teaching sufficient knowledge and sufficient disciplinary thinking in our actual lessons, that we'd sort of lost faith in the capacity of a genuinely good academic education to ground students in knowledge about the world and knowledge about how to challenge and to change it. I think it's obviously correct to say that these questions are now being raised in light of the security questions, but I also don't think it's absurd to ask those questions. Young men and women from Britain are making choices to travel abroad and be part of organisations that are abhorrent, not by any stretch of the imagination, even the large part of the minority. But these are important questions, and I think asking them now matters. I think in terms of where values acquire from, and I think this is where we get this problem of, oh, maybe we should go back to religion. I remember the Labour Party, we had lots of kind of blue Labour sort of talking about the value of religion a lot, but we're not a particularly religious country anymore. I think it's, you know, that ship has sailed, and I don't think it's a particularly bad thing. I think values are acquired by ritual and regularity, engagement and involvement. I think the problem often with religious values is that for many people they didn't permit challenge. That's why I think knowledge matters so much, because you have to say, these are our values, these are the ways that you can contest and challenge them, these are the rules by which you can engage in this debate yourself, and I come to believe that they are important and significant. And ultimately, I think there must be sensitivity in the ways in which schools treat their students, obviously, and each student has a different context. But I do think it is absurd to suggest that teaching students about liberalism, the rule of law and democracy is any more likely to make them want to run away and kill people in the Middle East. I'm sorry, that's simply, it entirely cheapens and I think misunderstands the reasons why people might be angry about one world or might make those decisions. There's a huge complexity of reasons there, and I don't think we should for a moment not assert the values upon which liberal society is based simply for fear of offending people.
Look, my take on that is, my take on what's been said so far is that I don't see it as hugely unclear. I don't see it as hugely problematic. I certainly don't need God to be good. And I don't see ritual or revelation as the means by which we discuss values. We have a rational discussion about that, or at least we need to have a rational discussion about that as a community. And I'm quite happy with the values that have been put on the table here. I'd be interested to know what alternative values people are proposing, but democracy, individual liberty, rule of law, respect and tolerance, I'd like to live in a society that is characterised by those values. My criticism of this society, if there is one, is that it's not sufficiently embodying those values. But I think the values are pretty good. They're hard-fought values. They come out of the wars of religion. They come out of the Enlightenment. And I think there's something worthy of defence. But I think, somebody asked, well, sort of, if I'm opposed to a prevent, what would you do? Or what do I do? I mean, what do I do? I do all kinds of things with my students. I see Dave Perks in the audience. One of the things he initiated Debating Matters, which the Institute of Ideas runs. I think that's a positive thing to do with students. I run a debating society at my college. That embodies these values and shows that, reason should be added to that. Knowledge might be a good thing to add to that as well. And I think that's something positive that all of us can do. I think we do need to be careful to avoid indoctrination. A liberal society or people who subscribe to liberal values have to be open to the fact that there might be new values that come along as well. But the way that a teacher avoids indoctrination is through communicating knowledge. And students can do many things with that knowledge. There's no guarantee that they will adopt your values. They're free to adopt all kinds of values. But I think really we have to locate the level at which we want to have this discussion in terms of these values. And I think that's something I, us, this collective here, this is a discussion that needs to happen at the level of the community. We all have to decide what kind of society we want to live in, what kind of values we want that society to embody. And I don't think this is a bad starting point. It falls to the community, not the state, actually, as it happens. It falls to the community to decide how we want to live and how we want to interact.
But I think Toby, you hit the nail on the head earlier. It's not necessarily questioning those 4 fundamental values per se, but the way in which they're being taught and the way those values are being enforced. And I think that in a way is the fundamental problem. And I mean, I see what you're saying, John, about curriculum and knowledge, and that's vital. But I mean, do we teach Hobbes and Locke anymore in schools? I mean, I consider myself a product of the Western canon and the Western tradition. I would say that in many ways I'm a Lockean. I above all else, tolerance and toleration in the Lockean sense of the word, of kind of civic space where we tolerate disagreement, where we engage one another, where we might really hate one another's positions, but as long as we're not killing each other, there's a space for us to kind of battle those out. I sincerely believe that is a fundamental basis for any civil discourse between human beings in any society. I think the profound problem is, and why I raise the issue of context, is not that it's not important to teach these values, and more importantly, the underlying philosophical, ethical, moral, and religious, I agree with the gentleman, foundations upon which those values are based, but the way in which we are now enforcing those values. Is school a place where we teach and engage with knowledge, as John has quite eloquently put forward to us, a place where we engage with knowledge deeply? Or is it a place where we enforce and engineer and demand? And I think that is then now becomes a fundamental question of what is the value of education? What is the value of schooling? You know, the value of schooling has been changing. We were talking about it earlier, Toby, from a place of learning and creating a kind of a person who's hardwired for lifelong learning to being a utilitarian exercise to fit them into the global capitalist order. Now we've added another thing onto that. We've now added onto that, and while we're fitting you into the global capitalist order and making you good cogs in the machinery of society, we're also enforcing a certain kind of value on top of you. And you know what? If you ask for a place to pray and you're in primary school, we're going to send you to the police. There's a problem here.
I just wanted to sort of comment on what Rania was saying about that sort of mechanistic sort of teaching of citizenship or values. I had a moment at my son's school this week when my heart sank. It is actually a Harris school. And I was in the playground, and they have these sort of notice boards outside, which is usually for sort of, information for parents and things like that. But they had these sort of newspaper clippings of the stories about the Queen being the sort of, longest reigning ruler, etc., with a big badge on the top saying British values. And I thought, oh God, seriously, is this what the school's leadership think British values is? And it's a really diverse school. I think my son's probably about the only white kid in his class. There's probably quite a lot of Muslim families. And what's striking, so I'm pretty sure there's very few people there would actually think that is the values that we want to instill. But what's striking is when you talk to other parents there about, what's important to them, people broadly want, people want the same things for their children. They want a good education. They want to know that the children are going to have good prospects. They want there to be discipline in the school and so on. There's a sort of set of values. It might not be what you would hold up in high as British values, but there are values there around which I think people would agree. And I suppose what I would want, I'm not convinced that we want to instill from the top down this sort of set of values that someone on high has decided. I'd like leadership from the school, but also a conversation with families there about what is important to us. And, not this is something we want to sort of teach necessarily, but these are the values we want to instill in the way that the school is run and what we expect from pupils and so on.
And behind, go up, lady.
Yes, I think I want to ask a question about the imposing issue. Like the way a school authority might impose a sense of value, because to some extent, I think one of the problems we're facing that's new is at the moment is the way values start to get imposed from underneath. So, and this is particularly obvious in universities at the moment, and but I suspect it, in a different, slightly different way, it might be a problem in schools. Is, for example, that societies getting closed down because they are, for example, rugby. So the idea of tolerance, for example, you can say, well, I think in a school should impose the idea of tolerance, i.e. free debate. But I feel that probably what's happening in schools is, in many ways, maybe responding to pressure from below about there are certain things that you can no longer put up with, which may be, for example, a school, people wearing a cross, I think was, a slightly old example, or whatever. So it's that sense about what is it that a school is doing now, that sort of schools are doing now, that really can impose a kind of a value of tolerance, as opposed to accepting the pressure from below, which seems to be increasingly around restricting what people can and can't say in certain circumstances.
A better approach to the problem. I think the first step that I don't think has been, I'm not sure it's been fully discussed here, and I think is what is the problem. I think we need to get the nature of the problem and where its source is before you can start thinking about how to address it. And I'm not going to say, voila, this is where the problem is. I think it is complicated, but I think the problem with the way it's being discussed, as epitomised very extremely in the prevent strategy, is that it is often seen as a problem from outside that people have to be protected against. If you like, the pull factors. And what is not looked at in that whole discourse is that there is something about the culture of Britain today that is incapable of socialising people, young people, into wanting to be part of that society. Even if they're critical of it, it's unable to socialise them into a position where they feel, I hate that, but I'm still part of it, and I'm going to try and change it. And its inability to do that is, I think, exerting a very big push factor into them finding the certainty and determinism and all the rest of it of ISIS and such like quite an appealing alternative. So, people may be doing that. I don't know their individual psychological circumstances or whatever, but I do know as an educator that in schools, and for what education has been for the 20th century, prevent, to me, represents the utter abdication of the idea that the school could socialise children through a liberal education, and the introduction of English at the beginning of the 20th century as the basis for the British national school system was closely associated with the values of autonomy and liberalism, but it was connected to the actual language itself, to epistemological characteristics of the language. And I think, a better place, if you want to think about it, is what's happened to literature. What's happened to literature and the kind of discussions and meaning and thinking, reading between the lines that used to happen there.
I just want to focus on two of the values, which are respect and tolerance, because I think we've become very disorientated about what those mean. Twice a day I walk past a school in Sparkhill in Birmingham which has a banner on the railings announcing a quote from their recent Ofsted inspection saying the children display the British values of respect and tolerance. But Spark Hill is one of the areas of Birmingham where there was the so-called Trojan Horse schools scandal, in which Ofsted went in to a number of schools in Spark Hill and Small Heath and gave them outstanding grades. And if you read the reports, one of the things that they identified as good about those schools was their promotion of equality and diversity. So it just shows that to go from, inspecting a school saying that that's the case, and then we have the Trojan Horse scandal, we have the idea about teaching British values in schools, and those being listed as respect and tolerance. I don't think collectively or collectively Ofsted or the government really know what respect and tolerance mean in terms of some things that the panel have raised about discussing and debating issues rather than just saying, yes, we understand how everybody fits in a particular box with a particular identity label on it, which is now, I think, what Ofsted certainly were looking at before.
The question about the families as well, and I think that chap over there also brought this relationship with the families or not, and sometimes the British value agenda seems to have been against the families, particularly families of faith, in which those values are not the permissible ones. There does seem to be this tension in this discussion as well.
Can I just pick up on the bit? I mean, the word British has come up again, although I wanted to leave it to the side. And it's your point about, about the Queen and saying British values. Funny enough, there was a couple of years ago a survey by The Guardian, I think, and they found that Muslims are the most patriotic so it's not actually about being Muslim or brown or anything. I actually happen to be a Republican. I know that at least a couple of people sitting on this panel with me are also Republicans. I'm not outing them, but I would say that what happened when you actually then equate the Queen with the idea. So there is an issue about, although we didn't want to talk about it, that label British is the one that getting the ire up. And the other one other thing I'm going to say, I'll leave a chance, is interesting, Rosie, about the Trojan Horse thing, because again, it was a hoax, and that's what gets me. And you're right, because before the hoax letter, and everyone knows it's a hoax letter, it wasn't real. Ofsted had gone in and declared these were outstanding schools, and literally post the hoax letter, suddenly the schools had to be the governing bodies. And what the interesting thing for me about that is that at the time I was saying, those governors who are probably parents, their children are going to school, are probably my children's age in their 20s, are probably being very British in being involved and becoming governors in schools. And I remember when I was a governor a long time ago, it was very difficult to get, BME, ethnic minority parents, to actually get involved and become governors. And suddenly they were doing exactly what they've been told to do for all these decades, be involved, become governors, but clearly as individuals they brought their own values with them, and they happened to be particularly Muslim values that affected maybe certain kind of behaviors around the school, but I'm not going to go into the details of it. So I think you're right, there is a discrepancy between things that are, seeing one thing in one light and then actually changing the mind altogether. And one other thing is that what scares me about this is that what if we had a different government and they decided they had a different list? And that always is in the back of my mind.
Well, I think it's interesting to consider this case of this primary school kid who asked to pray at school and asked the other female students to cover up. And I suppose one of the things we need to think about is, okay, I think we all agree that prevent is too far. That's the wrong response, and maybe that's just a bit easy for me to have used that in that way. But what is the right response? So I think that's an interesting question for me to consider. And I was talking to my supervisor about this in the lead up to this discussion, and he made I think a good point and maybe a slightly gentler point, which is, well, look, what we've got here is a failure of socialisation, right? So in many parts of the world, and for most of human history, there hasn't been this separation of education and religion. So I think maybe, for me anyway, Ryan, maybe this is what we should have a debate about. I think it's right on for the head to say, this is not a place of praying, this is a place of education. I think that's fine for the head to say that. That's what this school is about. And I think that's entirely acceptable for the head to say that. It's entirely unacceptable, in my view, to report to prevent. But I think the head should set the agenda there. In terms of what's new and what's different, I mean, I think there is perhaps a sociological constant, which is that each new generation presents the problem of moral reproduction. The next generation may not agree with us. We're sitting here, we may agree, we may disagree, but the next generation could come up with something different and may disagree, may decide not to be liberal, may decide to be all kinds of things. So I think that's a constant historically. Each new generation poses that problem, and teachers acutely face that. I mean, we're at the front line of that in our society. But I think maybe what's particular about the current moment is the insecurity with which the elite hold those values, and that's why I think what starts out as something that might be a positive opportunity for us to have a discussion about values, what kind of society we want to live in, which could be a fruitful discussion, and we might add things to the list, but I'm quite comfortable with this list. Actually becomes something deeply fearful in the form of prevent.
I mean, Toby is absolutely right. I think he said something earlier which was very important, which is about how far we hold teachers responsible for the later choices of their students. And I think that's really different. Students may well choose to be much less liberal than you want them to be. I think, and I hope that a liberal education would make them not so, but I think they're entirely free to make that choice. But of course the issue is that it's only a liberal, tolerant education that will permit everyone to make that choice with a common set of knowledge, whereas if you impose a much more conservative and authoritarian curriculum, it's much harder for those students to make their own choices later in life. And I think the point about imposing free debate, therefore, is very important, but I think it's often done in schools in a way that it's not an equal contest, because we say, well, we should impose free debate, and then the most assertive, the people most concerned to assert their rights, make that point across, and often they tend to be students who might be marginalised in society, and schools will validate their contribution, and then when other students who perhaps don't come from those groups want to contest that or be involved in a discussion about that, they are not permitted to do so because their contributions are seen as problematic or racist or difficult. I think schools need to work out how they resolve that particular conundrum whilst holding the ring fairly in a way. Like, these people are children. They are not yet fully grown adults. They are not fully formed in all of their opinions and ideas, and they can't, I think, be held fully accountable for them in that way. So teachers have to balance that overall. And I think the point on sort of family versus school, I think absolutely right. As I've said, I think a liberal education is what schools have socialised them into. I think, however, the fundaments of knowledge were systematically removed from education in England, in part because they were seen to be too difficult, and sometimes because they challenged the values people might be bringing in from home. But the reason we send our children to school is they get things they don't get at home. That seems to me the whole point. If I could do it all at home, it just becomes a form of elaborate free childcare in which I then have to read to them, and it seems a bit confusing that I would do that. I want them to do things that I won't do, and I think we need, so although families and communities must be involved in the discussion, school has a legitimate right to do things that challenge the values and the ideas of the home.
This question about the primary school child, I want to come back to that. Because let's play out this scenario, shall we?
Yeah.
Child comes in, says, prayer is real important to me. The afternoon prayer falls during the school hours. Can I have a place to pray? Head teacher says, school is not a place for prayer. No, you cannot pray. Child feels a little bit hurt, maybe feels a bit emboldened. Says, well, school isn't respecting or acknowledging my identity as a faithful person, as someone who wants to pray. Well, I believe actually that emboldens me to continue now on my campaign to garner the support of my fellow students, some of them who might not be practicing the way I should, because if they started practicing the way I should, they would also be asking for prayer, and there might be a certain difference. Now, what does that primary school student go home with when it comes to respect and tolerance, and freedom of speech, and accommodation? I think the very fact is that if a student wants a place to pray, and it's not interfering with the curriculum, and it's an important part of not only their self-identity, but part of who they are, an accommodation being made within a broader reference to respect and tolerance seems to be a far better solution than the solution undertaken by this particular head. Because in fact, what you've created now is an antagonism which will only continue to grow. And I think when we speak about those kinds of antagonisms, there of course is a dimension of privilege and not privilege. And there's a dimension of class, and there's a dimension of marginalization, and there's a dimension of race. Those are all at work here. They're all at work within our school systems, and to suggest that they're not is almost, I think, silly. The values that someone who lives in a flat in Mayfair and the sense of their British identity is going to be real different than someone who lives next door to me in Whitechapel. Because they're products of two different socioeconomic contexts. It seems to me that the head teacher who made that adjudication is a dummy and made a very, very wrong mistake. And not only that, has now set a very dangerous course in terms of the kind of values that she's representing or he's representing in her school.
So this child gets to pray in school. What would be asking for next? What would be the next thing he would want? And he would give him. And then after that, the next thing.
You seem like this is some kind of evil. You're suggesting that the asking for prayer is an evil.
You have the right to demand things in our society which we don't give to other people. We are not going to do what you want us to do because we are the majority and we decide these things.
Who's the we? You?
Yes.
White man?
The majority people of the country.
Exactly. In the name of respect.
Yes, exactly. What rights do the majority people of this country have over the minorities that are amongst them? Do they have any rights and duties? Do they have any rights or duties?
I consider myself a member of the majority, sir.
Well, okay then.
I'm a British citizen.
You are. You're a citizen. A political citizenship is not quite the same as being a citizen a cultural citizen, but I agree that you are one of those.
Yes.
But what I'm saying is, what rights do our major culture have over everybody else here? That's what I want to know.
One of the, I went to the discussion first thing this morning on why are young people joining ISIS, and I thought there was some interesting points raised there that are pertinent to this discussion as well. And one of the points that was raised was actually a cowardice that exists perhaps amongst people in authority, teachers, other adults in authority, politicians, in challenging some of these views that are presented maybe by young people in schools. The example that was given this morning actually was someone joining UKIP, but there could be other examples, for example, the prayer room. And I think that there seems to be a kind of a very unclear sense of the values that should be promoted. For me personally, I think that I would like to see these particular values that have been promoted as British values become British values. I would actually like Britain to be seen as a place where these values are upheld in the world and to be a beacon in that sense. And I don't have any problem with them being called British values. We are in Britain, and that would be my aspiration. I think, unfortunately, they're not kind of lived values in Britain, as we have seen through, and as has been illustrated through some of the points that people have made, and that would be the problem. I think it would be good if they were.
I've actually got some sympathy with this idea that the imposition of British values as described is an incitement. Not that I believe it's intended as an incitement, or it's intended to it's intended to result in people joining ISIS or anything like that. But because it seems to be done in bad faith. So the government are asserting these as values, and they're values that they don't live by, that they don't uphold. In fact, individual liberty is a value that's going to be discussed in school. It makes it very difficult when it's something which is so readily and easily flouted by the government. Where there's the security services are going to be involved if you actually exercise the individual liberty of freedom of speech. So I've got some. I think there are obviously values that need to be lived. and fought for by adults in obviously in wider society and in wider life, which is why I kind of object to the way in which, as ever, wider social problems, the government tries to address them through schools by putting children in the front line, whereas actually we know that these are wider political problems that we need to address amongst ourselves as adults first, and then once we've achieved a consensus on it, we can then we'd be a bit more comfortable about teaching it.
I think there's two parallel problems. The first is our societies, it's failing today to spontaneously reproduce itself at the level of socialisation. Generally in the past, historically, that thing happened fairly organically and naturally. Today that's not happening. And so the problem of the failure to spontaneously socialise the young generation has been passed on to schools. Now we need to clarify what is a school for. And a school is primarily about the transmission of knowledge to young people. But part of a school, the implicit byproduct of that education was socialisation, and it was organic. But what we have now is the fracture of that process within a school, and we now have schools increasingly being looked upon to carry out the socialisation process. And what happens is the value given to the transmission of knowledge diminishes as we expect schools to carry out more and more what you might call externally imported instrumentalist imperatives from outside society into the school. Now, this is a problem and there's a tension. And even worse than that, when schools socialised people in the past implicitly, society had a general agreement as to what those values were. Today we don't. So what you get in schools is not socialisation but social engineering. So the schools are actually looked upon to decide what the values are. So for example, if you take multiculturalism, if you take environmentalism or tolerance is, they tell school kids tolerance is about being nice to each other. No, it's not. It's about having the right to be offensive. As it happens, it's called free speech. Now the point is that adults in society don't always agree on these things, but we're bypassing that argument that we need to have that adult conversation. And there was a beautiful moment in this discussion tonight, Jane, and it was between the guy with the hat and the guy over there when they get into an argument. It was brilliant. That's exactly what we need. We need to have this argument out as mature adults about what values we subscribe to and what sort of society we want to have. And that's precisely the thing that we're not doing in Britain. And we transport that problem onto schools and expect schools to solve that problem.
I'll come back. So,
I think one way to look at this is that we're saying that schools are being asked to impose values, but they're frightened to do anything of the sort. And in fact, the conversation that most schools have with pupils is at arm's length. Don't talk to them, because we don't really know what they think. We certainly don't want to tell them what we think. In fact, the only values we have are there are no values. Make no judgments, please. And you put that in the context of the history of multiculturalism that's gone on and made it even harder to engage in a conversation with anybody who looks different or seems to act differently. And that gap between us and them grows and grows. And so when the head that Toby refers to has reacted and used prevent as a way to say something, it's the most crude and useless conversation you can possibly have. What we need to do is find our values and assert them. And that means as a school, as a head teacher or as a community, be clear about what your values are, stand up for them and say what they should be. And only when you do that will the pupils actually have a chance of understanding, the community have a chance of understanding it, and we'll be able to talk to each other. Until we do that, we're stuck. And I agree, the outcome that you get that's very distorted at the moment in the reaction to that, but there is a huge desire to find out what values do we stand for.
So I just wanted to draw a comparison to the Singaporean education system. So in Singapore, the majority of the population is Chinese. So that means that within schools, the Confucian philosophies are enforced very strongly, and classes are named after aspects of Confucius's value system. But within Singapore, there is the very, very small minority, which are the indigenous Malay population, who are Muslims. And they do go to the same schools, they practice the Confucius values, and they're enforced. But within that, they have the freedom to practice their religion, and schools end early on Friday so they can go to their prayer. And so I just don't see why we can't take that into Britain, where we just have everyone is British, but within our society, we have the different religions. And we can have British values, but why can't we give the freedom to Muslims, to different religions, to practice there, and to accommodate our schools and the timetable to allow them to do that?
Okay. Pass it to this guy in the grey.
Why aren't teachers able to teach with creative freedom? Because we are obsessed with standardized tests.
When I step out of the battle of ideas and go back to work next week, I'm going to have the argument over values. The first motion in our debating society is going to be, I don't need God to be good. And that's going to pose these questions about democracy, individual liberty, rule of law, respect and tolerance. So I suppose the point I'm making is I take the point about the elite. I made that point myself as well. Not bad faith, not believing in these values, etc., etc. But that doesn't get us anywhere. I also take the point that teachers themselves can't resolve the crisis of values, but we need to have that fight as teachers in order to create the space in which we can argue for knowledge and teach and practice. So I suppose the point I'm making is that it is a fight. We can't duck it. It's not going to be pleasant. People will disagree. And within that, I think the key thing that we do need to preserve, which isn't being preserved at the moment, is a space for individual dissent. So I think that's the element of tolerance that we need to recover, and then we don't put people in a corner.
A lot of really interesting points. I know a lot about Singapore. My wife grew up there, and I think some of those other models are potentially instructive. I want to just raise one issue, address one issue that the gentleman raised, and he said something very truthful, and I think you revealed a great truth when you talked about cultural citizenship, because I think we are living within a policy environment around values where we see the emergence of a dual citizenship. It's not enough anymore to hold a British passport, to pledge allegiance before God to the Queen as I did. But in this country, there is emerging a profoundly undemocratic dual citizenship, what the gentleman called cultural citizenship. And I think that is among the most pernicious and dangerous things to emerge in any democratic society. And this government and those who are pushing the values debate along the prevent line are creating this sense of dual citizenship, and the end result of that process is absolutely disastrous to things like social cohesion and communities coming together, but it's absolutely disastrous to a sense of what Britain can be and ought to be in the future.
Yeah, I think literally the whole point of citizenship is that it's universal and common. That's how it works, that's what it means. So I think that division is, I think you're absolutely right, is pernicious and unhelpful. 3 points I'd make. Thank you for referencing Singapore and not Finland. It's always very exciting when you go to education events and nobody mentions Finland. That's great. I don't have a huge amount to say about that, but I think when we take international comparisons for English education, I think we have to be very, very cautious with how much we want to import from that. I think we get a very long way. Actually, the question is for us to answer the questions about what we want our education system to do and be and things like that. I think the question of the prayer issue, let me put it this way. What if it was 49 teenagers who insisted, male teenagers who insisted on gender segregation in the prayer room? Would we be happy with the school permitting that? And I would think not. But that's my point about the school as a place in which the conflict of rights and its resolution is modelled, and is modelled for the benefit both of those students asserting their rights, those students whose rights might be challenged by the assertion of those rights, and all the other students who may feel that they don't have an immediate interest in that issue at all. I think it's really important that the school itself models and makes explicit that it is modelling that, it performs that. And I'll finish this with something controversial to that. I love standardised tests, they're awesome.
I don't know how I can top that about standardised tests. So many interesting points. The idea is really funny about being a citizen, because I feel quite universal. I feel a citizen of the world. I'm Lebanese, I'm British. I can fit in any place. I don't feel I particularly have to justify it. But it's really Dave's point about teachers and what having confidence in something they believe in or they don't believe in. And it is worrying to me, because I taught teachers for many years, and the scary thing was when they started coming in and saying to us, just tell me what I need to do, so when Ofsted comes in, I will pass. And again, I'm a governor at a sixth form college in London, and Ofsted declared they're coming in next week. And I know this weekend a lot of the teachers were sitting there actually trying to embed British values in teaching things like, health and social care or whatever it is. And that's what they were. They were worried because Ofsted was coming in. I don't think that's the idea. I think the problem is we've had educational policy that has imposed so many different orthodoxies, whether it's to do with healthy eating, whether it's to do with recycling, but they were imposed as orthodoxies, not as topics to be discussed, to be debated, and for a school community to come to an agreement what that school community, as outlined by its head, its staff and its governing body, what they want to see as a predominant value. And I think maybe if we take it back to the school community, we empower our teachers to have a voice, but to have a voice based on knowledge. And yes, I do teach Hobbes and Locke to my teachers, but that's at university. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Right, can we thank our panel for